of accompanists.
Yeah.
Juliet and I are on it.
Looks like we're live.
Oh, we're live. We're just waiting
Welcome.
for people to arrive.
Yeah, I'm going to turn this around in a second.
So far. I would ask Chris Gines in the office.
Oh, yeah.
Get you a list. Because there are people on there that I don't know, and they should be on our roster. They should
Yeah,
join our
that work for
guild.
UVU.
Yeah,
And you're working for UVU still right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
and Snow.
If you had Snow in Westminster.
Wow.
How are you keeping up with that?
It is so much easier than BYU.
Is
It's
it?
so much less work. I drive to Snow Wednesday morning. I teach there all day. They put me in a hotel. I have like 2 more students Thursday morning. I drive to UVU, which is straight on my way home, and teach students, and then I'm done. Wednesday, Thursday is it for me. Westminster, last year I had 1 student.
Oh.
But it's a tiny little school.
Yes, it's small.
And so it's great to be affiliated because I gave a recital in their nice little chamber hall last year and stuff. But I probably will never have more than like 3 or 4 students there at the most. So
yeah, at the most.
yeah. And I don't have faculty meetings. I don't have to file faculty reports. I don't have committee meetings.
You don't have those faculty status thingies.
Yeah, it's so much simpler.
Hi.
How are you, my dear?
Ethel stole my garden.
Oh my goodness!
Oh,
Thank you so much.
Come on. Quite a cute dress.
see you.
Love your dress.
So-
This is
So yeah,
Amy
it actually
Coulter
was to simplify my
and
life.
Maria.
Yes, yes.
And this is
So
Beata.
you're still, financially, it's okay.
Well, when I got the BYU job, I was like, I'm going to be frugal, and
Oh.
I'm fine. I have no mortgage.
You have no mortgage?
I'm in good shape. I have a
Yay.
pension.
Yeah,
So.
you are in good shape. You should give a class on how to be a wise musician.
I fully recognize it's a luxury. Like,
Yes.
it's my circumstances were such that I could do it, but yeah, when I got the job at BYU, I kind of felt like if I'm still here when I'm 50, I think I want to have enough investments and stuff to quit. And
That's what Irene Peary did. Yeah, she's heavily invested in the market. And she is yeah. Okay, welcome officially. Our 5 people here today. More will come, I am sure of it. I'm hoping. Anyway, I have some more copies. So this is the little newsletter. Were you at the summer social? You got one? Everybody got one? Okay, so we aren't having a meeting every other month. We're going to have one in September and then one in January. The one in January is a member masterclass. And Jared Pierce is going to come be our clinician. So if you're interested in bringing somebody that you're playing for and playing in front of your peers, I know it's scary. I'm going to do it. I'm not playing Song to the Moon, though. That's the result that I did that this week. It's like D flat, and it's all this orchestral stuff. Anyway, we're going to have 3 or 4 people play. So if you're interested in doing that, and we'll learn from each other. I think that'll be a great thing. So if you want another master class, we can do that. I have, if you're a piano teacher, I cleaned out some books, and I have the Well-Tempered Keyboard Teacher.
Don't know what that is.
It is now yours. You have a gift.
Well, thanks.
And I bought this by mistake. Classic pop and rock hits. Easy version. I
Yeah.
love this arranger, Philip Keverin.
Yeah.
And he's
good.
good.
It have guitar chords?
Yeah, they should.
Yeah, it has
Yeah.
chords.
Okay.
Just doesn't have the fret pictures.
The tablature there.
Yeah.
Yeah. If anybody's interested, it has Bohemian Rhapsody, From a Distance. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For
You're
my
welcome.
son.
Oh, very good. All right. Oh, well, I am very bad, and I did not look up your bio, but I've known April for a long time, and I played for a few of your students, not very many. Thing about some of her students, they wait to the last minute, and they are up a
Well,
creek without a
I
paddle.
know that you play for a lot of strings, so.
Yeah, but now I'm moving over to vocal, and so I was like, oh, just whatever. It keeps the brain active because you have to learn the music, right? April has a doctorate from Juilliard. Yeah. So we are really, it's special to have her here, but she's teaching. Looks like somebody just pulled up. That might be Diane. Do you know Diane Carter?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's her car. She's going to talk, and it's just a
Yeah.
casual conversation. If we have questions,
Oh, sure.
is that all right?
Yeah.
Can we, okay. All right, so we'll put you here. You can sit here because then we'll be on the live stream.
Yeah.
Welcome, April.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, so I was told to introduce myself. It's great to have the introduction already. I grew up in Utah. I grew up in Bountiful. I came from a musical family. And so I started piano, well, first Suzuki violin, then piano, then flute when I was 9. And I was great with that background of violin and piano. As a 9-year-old flutist, I really took off because I could read music and all that stuff. And that gave me a lot of confidence. So I started working with pianists in the area really young. I started working with Diane Bastian and Jed Moss, both when I was about 11. And I know a lot of pianists in the community. It's a really great community. And I went to Oberlin because the flute professor there had been the teacher at the Paris Conservatory for many years. And Paris, if there is a flute center of the universe, it's Paris. And then I went to Cincinnati Conservatory and did my doctorate at Juilliard, and then got the full-time job at BYU straight out of Juilliard. I did my schooling young, so I got the BYU job when I was 25. I was there for 22 years. And now I'm adjunct by choice so that I have a lot more time for creative projects. I'm doing a lot of CD recording and concertizing and that kind of thing, which has been really great. But I've always had a lot of flute students. My first flute student was when I was in 5th grade, and my 2 little best friends, I just loved the flute, so they both started the flute. And one of them, their parents sent them straight off to lessons. The other, their parents said, we're already paying for piano lessons, so I became her teacher. And I was so proud of the things she did as my student, and I just kept collecting students. So I had like 6 or 7 all the way through high school. And I always knew that I loved teaching. So I will talk about one thing. I want you to feel free to interrupt about anything really, but a specific thing is that while what I'm hoping for from an accompanist for myself is similar to what I hope for my students, it's not the same always or often. And so if you want to clarify, like, what about, is that for you or is that for your students, feel free. And I'm sure a lot of the things that I have in mind, other people who've come and talked to you will have said very similar things too. So if there's some particular thing I say that you think, let's explore that more, that's fine with me. But first I put together just a list of some practical aspects of working with a pianist, because availability, location, schedule really does matter. And so what Jane was saying about waiting for the last minute, I so try to get my students to find an accompanist early, but especially the college students can be really bad about that. They just assume it's going to be so easy to find somebody, and then it is not. So yeah, that's a big one. Also a shared vision of outcomes. Like, are we working together for the year? Are we putting together a program that you're going to perform at the end of your senior year, and this is the very beginning of fall of your senior year? What is the collaboration leading to exactly? One thing, especially for my college students, is negotiating fees. What is reasonable and from whose standpoint? One thing that I'm curious for your take actually is that I've seen more and more, and I think this comes more from young accompanists, but I could be wrong. I just had a student at Snow tell me that he was looking for pianists, and there was one person that he had in mind, but that person said, well, for every new piece I haven't played, I charge $100 to learn that piece. And then rehearsals and performances and things are on top of that. And they looked through the list and it's like, well, there are 4 new pieces, so that's $400 up front. So I'm not going to do that. And so, and my instant reaction was like, no, don't do that. And so I don't know if how that strikes you, but my feeling is like, it's fine if it's like, this is new repertoire for both of us, therefore we need more rehearsal. You're going to need to plan that we do more rehearsal, or that the pianist looks at it as an investment of, I'm going to learn this flute music. I'm interested in playing for flutists, and I will continue to use this for years to come. But so those kinds of, is there a meeting of minds with those logistics? And sometimes also, like, I was thinking about practical aspects, and one year, because I could take free classes at BYU, I took a business marketing class, and they talked a lot about not just meeting customer expectations, but delighting the customer. and the reason that came into my mind is that when I was at BYU, I traveled a lot with Jed Moss, and of course he was traveling constantly with Air Supply. And so we would have to figure out the schedule far in advance. But when I traveled with him, I have a feeling it's because he traveled with those guys so much, and he was so confident traveling and getting around. And he would constantly do things like, oh, you just go in, I will figure out how to park the car. Can I bring you some water? Do you have what you need in this room? And I never, ever thought that was the accompanist's job. And it's not. But it just seemed like, wow, I want to do more of this with him. Like, he's so good. He knows that I'm in this pressure situation. And in fact, so is he, but he's doing everything he can to help me. So yeah, I'm not expecting every accompanist to
Bring you water.
like, you're my accompanist, bring me my water. And in fact, yeah, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is aspects of musical collaboration, and one of my things on that list is really being a duo, like really being collaborators. So yeah. But I thought I would mention that because it was so sweet. He was just so good at those kinds of little gestures. But so I don't know, any questions or thoughts so far?
I have a couple. One is, I would love to have a sort of gathering, a lecture about what people learned from Jed Moss, and get all of the people that worked with him, and that would be like a posthumous lesson on a master class on the company, because he was just one of the best. And also, when regards to fees, I think you're right that I have heard some crazy wild stories that students have found with what they're being charged, and I think you are right that it is an investment, and there is some. It could be collected from the pianist end. I could collect it through an extra rehearsal, or I could just charge them a modest amount for difficult repertoire, like the very modern stuff. And the reason I know I should is because they will get passed on from a pianist. A pianist will pass that and say, I'm not learning that piece. Another pianist, I'm not going to play that. And so when they come to me, they're getting more of a premium service. So I want them to recognize that, and I want to be somehow. So it's like a modicum. It's a small token, but it's not $100 per piece.
Yeah.
And also when a teacher is assigning that student, they're going to have to be upfront.
Yeah.
They're like, hey, this piece is a bear. It's going to cost you some. Do we want to go forward? It's going to cost you more than your Bach sonatas. So I think that if we keep that in mind, that a lot of the common repertoire that is very competition, we're winning, and there's a reason they're getting selected to play it. on the other end, there's this incredibly pressure situation for the pianist.
Uh-huh.
Lots of notes, lots of, for me, reduction
Yeah.
in the score just to make it playable at the crazy speed.
Uh-huh.
And all we have, if anybody's to blame, it's the composer.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that.
Composer handed over.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think just politically, the more it can feel like it's about the time and the effort and not, I have to learn this piece, so you have to pay me to learn it, the more the student will accept it.
Yeah.
If it's like, this is difficult repertoire, I'm going to have to charge you more for rehearsals, we'll have to have more rehearsals. That to me sounds completely reasonable.
But not like you got them over you're raking them over the coals because it's not really their fault. But
yeah.
I think there's a good discussion to have up front on both ends.
Do you guys, because I'm brand new at this world, but do you guys have you don't, in your fee schedule, you don't separate it out by like difficult or,
I
beginning
personally don't.
students
I don't
versus,
even have the list, which is very bad, but no.
you just negotiate per performance kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Well, and as a matter of practicality, I will, if my student says, I want to play Jolivet Chandelinos, we'll say, okay, who knows that piece?
That's a good place to start. Yeah.
Rather than go find a stranger and,
And hope for the best.
But so hopefully it really is an investment
Mhm.
because the teachers know that there are not going to be many people who play this piece. And you send them where you are aware that this person knows the repertoire.
Right. From my experience, when I was a student, my piano teacher, Paul Pohl, I said, don't charge to learn music, especially when you're a student or you're just starting out in the field of collaborating. And so I didn't. And I got a lot of string students. So I learned a lot of string repertoire. And Diane Bastian was around, so there was no need for me to even delve into the flute repertoire. So now I'm a baby in flute repertoire. I mean, unless it's sight readable. So I do charge for stuff that I don't know. And I'll tell you, I played the Bruch Violin Concerto like 5,000 times or more throughout my life, but some of the flute stuff I haven't had any experience. So I do charge a small fee for an hourly. I'll look at the music and I'll say, oh, that'll take me 2 hours to learn. So I charge them a small fee for that, not $100. Very often it takes longer than what I've estimated, but I still kind of stick to the first.
But it's based on difficulty, not the fact that it's new. And I think that's the catch.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And I just think this is a very valuable topic because certainly as a musician, I'm not looking for how can we get a bunch of work for free from pianists. Like, you are musicians too. Let's respect your time and everything. Once in a while, I come across a win-win situation, like a composer who's also a pianist and wants to play his piece with me, and it's good for both of us, and so there's no fee, but we're both doing each other a service. But that's such a rare situation. And so figuring out what's the best way to package it that ends up being fair but doesn't make anyone feel like, well, why should I have to be the one who pays for that,
And also the fact that when you're talking about college students who need to learn this, that's true. If you're saying this is a situation where go get a college student, and expect a lower rate and let you're both learning, you're working together. But if it's a high pressure competition, then you're telling them to go get somebody else. And that's also a good conversation to have.
Yeah. And I had the experience at Juilliard. I took a class that was a collaborative duo class, piano and an instrumentalist with Samuel Sanders. And that was amazing. And although, of course, he spent most of the time working with the pianist, not me, but it was great to be in the room and see what they were doing and absorb that. And that was one of my peers. She was a great pianist, and she and I did a lot of work together and a lot of performances together. And it was built into our schooling. And I know that's such a luxury. It's not like most, I don't know if there's a single school in a several 100-mile radius that really sets that up. Like, here's your duo partner. You're going to work together and be coached and everything all year. That would be really fabulous.
Yes, it would be.
And that would give more pianists a chance to get those pieces in their fingers without worrying about being paid for it because it's college credit.
Right.
But anyway, so there we can get universities to jump on board. I kind of doubt it, but anyway. Anything else with that?
It makes sense.
Yeah. Well, so musical collaboration, yeah, at the top of my list, I have can the pianist be a duo partner? So it's not just sort of like you're my accompanist. And I do think the more long-term lasting relationships that you can have, the better. So it's not this scramble of like, well, who could I get that could probably play the Lieberman concerto, you know? But also, like, can we discuss the musical vision, adjust to each other, feel like there's an open door to discuss that, to like, well, this piece we need to both equally be partners. This piece, you're in the limelight and I'm playing these little chords and, you know, that kind of thing. But also in terms of the student's maturity, because when I have young students, I love it if the accompanist can kind of coach them in a friendly way so that I feel like, oh, they can have their rehearsal. I don't need to be there. And what needs to get done is going to get done. But I had kind of the opposite thing sometimes with college students, that if the pianist is too eager to say, no, you're playing it too fast, or like, you know, like this is the correct tempo for this piece. It's like, well, this is a college student, and they even if they're wrong, they need to begin to learn to run the show in terms of what they want artistically with this flute repertoire. So, and like for myself, obviously I'm not looking for a coach, although if I'm playing with a composer, yes, like what is your vision for this? You tell me. But still, I want my pianist to feel free to say, I'm not sure about this tempo, you know? So yeah, like those kinds of communication about artistic things, artistic decisions, and how much of it is kind of spoon-fed to a student versus when does it become more, this is a real collaboration. And I feel like the more the student can feel all along like that, even if they're in 12th grade or something, that if the accompanist can put it in a diplomatic way, but still get their point across, that's a real asset for students who are young but becoming more college age, almost, you know, pre-college, gonna be a music major, that the accompanist is kind of helping to get them there. That's a lot to ask. Yeah. I mean, that's beyond just taking care of the piano part.
So you're saying that you would hope that their professional accompanist is like giving them opportunity to discuss it, or saying let's have a discussion about it, or you're hoping that they'll direct them and guide them? What do you?
Well, it's an age thing.
Okay.
That if the student is really young or less experienced and they're having a rehearsal and I can't be there, it's great if the accompanist can say, I've played this before, and right here you're not waiting quite long enough for me, you know, or like this, do you see there's a retard here? Should we be doing more of this retard? You know? Yeah. But I have had, not a lot, but occasional times where a college student is working extensively with me and we're talking about tempos and musicality and stuff. And then they've gone to a pianist that kind of overrides and says, nope, this is the way this piece goes. Wow. It's rare. Yeah, so I feel like the more mature the student is, the more, and also just the training of a student, that if they're training to try to be professional, that the accompanist kind of aids them in that, that journey.
I usually let the tempo settle because everybody gives the wrong tempo to the pianist. It's like because they have to also realize that there's a much faster section,
Uh-huh.
then it becomes too messy, right? Even they become super messy. So they have to. So I usually let it. Okay,
Uh-huh.
we'll get there.
Well,
Let's try it out.
I'm really glad the discussion's gone in the direction of tempo. Perhaps I also kind of pushed it there a little bit, but because that was one of my big things that I said about musical collaboration is that, especially for me, if I'm going to travel or something and just meet up with someone, that's one of my biggest deal breakers is the tempo going to be right? And that comes from experiences that I've had. And of course, like with students, especially, that may be a mutual, we need to find this together. But when I recorded my first CD back in 2003 with Max Wilcox, who'd won all these Grammys, and I had two pianists with me, and one was very let's do exactly what we planned, and the other was kind of like, let's see what happens and be inspired in the moment. And that pianist was much less consistent with tempo. And Max Wilcox at one point pulled me aside and said, for the process of recording CDs, tempo is crucial. You don't fish around for it because you have to do all these edits and it has to work. And then there was one time I did a recital at University of Iowa, and this was a long time ago, or I wouldn't even state the school, but I was paired up with someone who was on the staff there to play the Lieberman Sonata, flute sonata, which was my choice. And the tempo changes a lot. And it was all over the place when I got there. And I had said, I pretty much stick with the printed tempos, and it's constantly changing. But there was no predictability. And so I came away from that feeling like, can I just not play this on the road? And I never have since, actually. I've only played it when I've had a pianist that I've brought along, or that I know I've played this with them before. And that hasn't been a plan. It's just that I have felt like, well, that time it didn't work out so well. So I guess those kinds of experiences have led me to, like, if I'm going to go somewhere and play a concert with only 2 or 3 rehearsals, that's one of my main, here are my tempo markings, and this is really what I'm going to do, to just try to get us on the same page as much as possible. But yeah, of course, with students, it's a different matter, and there may be a need for a lot of different rehearsal tempos and finding what's really going to work in a collaborative setting. So that's one of those things that diverges. Although I had a student doing an international competition once, and I told her that, whoever your accompanist is, just see if you can get in touch in advance and tell them your tempos, and any big musical vision or whatever that you feel they need to know, just don't be shy about putting it out there in advance.
So it has to do with the technique of a pianist, because some have a limit how very fast virtuosic pieces they can play. And I have noticed that they will slow down when they are comfortable.
Yeah, and I have had the
much
experience too of being on the road and having a pianist that is perpetually slowing things down and feeling like I'm fighting it, like I'm kind of wading through water, like, come on, keep the tempo going. And I think the one thing, I have this working with flutist little list, and the single biggest thing on that list is accommodating breathing without picking up the wrong cues from breathing. Because that pianist, I'll never know, but I felt like part of the issue was that when I breathed, she took it as a signal to take time, every time.
Mm.
And so it was like, no, I'm not actually stopping. It's like a singer, like I'm going forward. And so I kept, even in the concert, I just was constantly faster. And I think some of it was her familiarity or lack with the music, with the pieces. But I think some of it had to do with misinterpreting some breathing. So, yeah. But if you're doing it, like, you'd like to hope that if you're invited to play at a major university, or you're going to do an international competition where they provide a list of pianists, like, the pianists should go with the competitor's tempo.
So I have a question about tempo then. So I will reduce the score in order to make the tempo what they want.
Uh-huh.
And how do you feel like that diminishes your performance at all?
I would definitely always prefer that, especially if it's something like a concerto
Yeah.
reduction. But even if it's like a really standard flute sonata that I wish I heard all the notes, I would still so much rather, like, but the tempo's great, than, I've got to take it slower so the pianist can get all the notes.
Well, for you, you'd be working with somebody who is at that level where they could play all the notes. But
Yeah.
what if it was your student? Thinking
Yeah.
in that terms.
Yeah, I still, if they're doing some like solo and ensemble competition or some solo recital or whatever, I want them to be able to do what they've practiced and not have to like, we better take this down 3 notches on the metronome.
Mhm.
That being said, there have been a small handful of times where a student will tell me, I realize that I have to take the box slower for my accompanist. And I'll like, no, you shouldn't do that. And then when the two of them get together and it's like, your concert's next week and this is not working at all, then I feel like, okay, for one thing, we should have done this all much earlier. And I have done that sometimes. I've told students sometimes I can be the bad guy and say, we're not at the right place, are we? Like, let's find someone who's played this piece more, and this has been good experience, but let's make sure this is going to work out, Very rarely have I done that, but I have done that a few times, especially for bigger events that it really matters for the students' success at a recital or something like that. So,
do you find that sometimes your younger students are a little ambitious in their tempo, and then when they get with the accompanist, discover that they can't keep that tempo when there's another person playing with them?
somewhat, but more I find those things in their lessons. That if they're trying to push too fast and it's getting sloppy, it's like, well, then in your lesson, we need to teach you to not go that fast yet.
Yeah.
And in an ideal world, wouldn't it be great if they always had an accompanist at their lessons?
That's true.
And
That
then
would
it
be
would all
nice.
happen simultaneously.
Yeah. Well, I just had one last year, a flutist,
Uh-huh.
and she, I said, it just feels like this is a little bit hard. Would you check with your teacher on the tempo?
Yeah.
And she did, and she slowed it down a bit because it just was getting away from her. And she,
Yeah.
so.
Well, and definitely there is part of why I say that wouldn't it be great if it all happened simultaneously is that sometimes it's just they're not aurally used to what's going on,
Right.
and they need to slow it down for rehearsal to like, this is how the pieces all fit together. And of course that's not just for students. I have a flute, viola, harp trio in New York that is a great group, and we practice under tempo constantly. Just like, can we go about 2/3 tempo just to listen? Because all of our sounds are so different, and because we've been doing most of our practice alone because we're all spread out across the country. So yeah, I think slowing things down is really productive and useful. And yeah, sometimes it's just, well, you're playing fast enough that it's getting sloppy. It's just not the right tempo, But even if it is the right tempo, I think, just the like, let's slow down and maybe come watch the score and see how much you can observe of what the pianist is really doing. And so.
Well, she was 13, so I figured I had a little bit of.
Oh, yeah.
Just check with your teacher on the tempo.
Yeah.
Make sure that.
And
that's what she
definitely,
wants,
I don't want my message to be like disempowering.
No, I wanted to
collaborative.
do however she wanted to do it, but I
Yeah.
thought,
But like the
Just check.
collaborative pianist, I don't want to disempower you, because you should be an equal part of making the music. But yeah, that's great that you'd say like, can you check with your teacher? But yeah, I also as a teacher of a 13-year-old would like, if the pianist says this is not working right, can we think about a slower tempo? I'd like, yeah, I bet, if that's how things were happening, I would listen to your pianist, Yeah, I think that's all a balancing act. And I guess if I were to boil that all down, I would say like communication and the ability to work with people at different levels, students at different levels, professionals in different situations. It's such an asset because the job is really to play the music, but rehearsing the music, it's so important what happens in those rehearsals. And I think that there are so many of you here that I've worked with that are so good at this, both with me and with my students. And that's where, like, if a pianist doesn't dare to kind of speak up when there's a reason to speak up, that's not good either. So, I just think that was the thing about Jed that made things work with such a variety of people so well, is that he was really good at getting everything to come together, but you never felt like he was pointing a finger at you. He was so effusive and positive, and he clearly loved the process of making music. And it felt like we were always in it together, doing it together. It never felt like, well, what, you don't like my tempo, He would just kind of put it in a way of like, this gesture isn't working right now. Can we do this a different tempo for me, And then we might together decide like, oh, that is better, So yeah, just this sort of diplomacy and interpersonal, like making it work well. But like I say, I've worked with at least half of you directly, and I feel like you're all really good at that. So,
So you want basically balance, like the
Yeah.
right place, the right time, what to say, what not to say. You kind of have to feel.
Yeah, like kind of adapting to
Yeah.
circumstance and who it is that you're working with, and whether they need more or less guidance. But I got so much wisdom from Jed, but he never did it in a way of like, oh, let me tell you about this. And I think he had a way of doing that with students also, like not being, I'm going to tell you how this works, but like, can we try this? Anyway. Of course, I have to talk glowingly about Jed because we all loved him and he's gone. But yeah, I would say so many nice things about you too. So, yeah. And that's why, those of you that I know, and you've been doing this for so many years because you work well in these different circumstances. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, I've definitely seen it.
What I want the students and the people that I work with understand is I probably see them maybe 45 minutes in a day, but I do that for 8 to 10 other people as well.
Yeah.
And so they need to realize what we do
Uh-huh.
on a daily basis
Yeah.
for not just them, but for many people.
Yeah. And I definitely have discussions with students about that too.
That's helpful
Yeah.
for us. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Because, discussions about you've just poured in all this work over these past several months on this really hard piece.
Months? Who are you talking about? Months?
No, she's talking
Oh.
about the
Okay.
student.
Okay.
Yes,
Student.
they get the luxury
Yeah,
of
and I'm
them.
telling the student, like, look, this has been your project for all these months. But these pianists have to jump in and do it. And they're getting ready with you, but it's not like they've had the luxury of dedicating that same time.
Mhm.
So,
One of my favorite things is when they do know they want to work with you and they get you the music, and they know their dates as much as possible.
yeah.
But it's always fun when you get a text, hey, somebody recommended you as an accompanist. I'm looking for an accompanist. Are you available? Just those simple sentences. I'm looking for an
To be
accompanist. Are
my
you available?
accompanist.
Like that. Yeah, sure.
Well-
I've got nothing else to do for
Yeah.
the next 3 months. So
Well, one of my best, I've had some really great relationships with accompanists and projects with accompanists. And one of my very best was doing my Carnegie Hall recital debut, and I was working with 2 pianists. And one was also a composer, and we were playing one of his pieces. And the 2 of them, it was a long time ago, and I can't remember how it came up or what, but the composer, I think it's very straightforward. The other one, I think, was like a high-level grad student at Juilliard. But they both were anxious to play at Carnegie Hall, and they both were kind of like, you don't have to pay me.
Mm.
And then we spent hours and hours and hours rehearsing. I won this competition when I was brand new at BYU. I scheduled the concert for January 11th. I was in New York from the end of the semester, like December 11th. And for that month, just constant rehearsals, because the concert was going to be reviewed. It was a big deal for them too. And it was just like, wow, this, I don't have to worry about the money. I don't have to worry about how to respect their time. Actually, the composer was the one who was like, now let's see, can you do it tomorrow? Can you do it the day after? What's your schedule the day after? And so it wasn't even initiated by me. And I just felt like this, if it could always be this way, performances could always be so amazing, but it can't. Unless it's like, let's see, can we get a patron that just gives us both a salary every year to work together? And but yeah, so life and these situations, working with an accompanist, working with a duo partnership, the circumstances can be so different from something like that. That's this amazing luxury, or like I was saying, having a collaborative pianist duo in college that we were both getting credit and we were both equally invested. But those kinds of situations are such a luxury. And so I definitely try to get my students to understand that. But
Thank you.
I guess also they have to know that they have to try to get the best pianist, whatever
Yeah.
that means, because music is music, right? The audience actually hears end product.
Yeah.
And if the pianist is really good, the audience is gonna think like, okay, it's an amazing performance.
Absolutely.
So they already get
Yeah.
so much bang
Yeah.
for their buck, so to
Mhm.
speak. you
And
know?
so, yeah, when I
They
was
have
at
to understand that. Yeah.
That's such a good point, because when I was at the upper age limit of competitions, where the age limit was like 30 or something, I would travel. I would pay it and travel with my accompanist rather than, they always had someone available, but I would always bring mine. And there were circumstances where judges would say it's so special that you have this duo that's already put together, because then, like, if you get into the place where there are 6 finalists and they're all playing with the same pianist and it all starts to sound just the same, But if you've put your own stamp on it and you and your pianist are fully responding to each other and not like, wait, what was your tempo? You were the slower one, you know? It makes such a huge
True,
difference. So, and that, I've had some discussions with students that I've worked really hard to be diplomatic when they're like, I have a pianist roommate. Or like, my grandpa's a really good pianist. And like, well, what has he done? I won't just say no instantly, but who's your grandpa? But even that, sometimes it's like, well, if you've worked with a family member your whole life, you should work with someone else, because you won't. That is a certain dynamic, obviously, that you're not always going to have. So
It always happens. Recently, I was doing some. It was very simplistic oboe concert, and a couple of students asked me the repertoire. Is kind of it's kids, but it's funny because it's a lot of relatives play for the other kids. I'm like, I will play for free. I will sign it, can I? Because it's just painful, you know.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, please help the kid. Me, can I?
well, and one thing that this is a little silly of me even to say, but I grew up playing the piano, but I knew all along I was going to be a flutist, and I decided in college that I was not gonna both teach and accompany my students. And I know there are people who make different choices, and I'm not criticizing them, but I just felt like it should be a different partnership. There's the teacher who can coach and whatever, either the individual student or the partnership, but the student needs to be learning how to do that with someone who's not just feeding them everything. And that's why I say the thing about like, how do you communicate with a 12-year-old versus a professional versus a college student? Because and the reason I feel a little silly is like, if someone asked me to accompany them now, I'd say I don't have the skill set. I loved the piano, and I did a lot of piano work. But some of it was just purely like, I need to specialize in my flute. But I also felt like, well, I'm not doing the student a favor. And I will actually accompany brand new, like if they've never played with a pianist, I will give them some book and say, this book, you and I'll sit at the piano and play with you. But beyond that book, I won't do it.
So that reminds me, if I was training an accompanist, and is there a book you often go to with your first students? I know about Suzuki books, I know about art songs, but where do flute players go for their
Well, that depends.
pedagogy?
There is Suzuki flute, and generally I think Suzuki flute's good. There are a couple of technique things with the way Suzuki flute's taught that like the way they teach articulation, the rest of the world doesn't really do that way. And so when I get Suzuki students, I'm like, you're gonna have to deal with your tongue. But there are Suzuki flute books, and there are some teachers that use them a lot. I actually had a book in my head when I said that, which is this 40 Little Pieces by Louis Moyes. And they are like solo. The first one I think is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And so it is a book that they would get out of in their first 1 or probably at most 2 years of playing. So these are students I'm trying to, and I don't teach maybe any of these students anymore. I really enjoy it, but as a teacher, like in college and stuff, I was trying to get them familiar with playing with other people right away. So it's not like, oh, you play the flute, you've only played by yourself for 3 years because you're 12 and you're not in band. But like, let's have you playing with somebody. Of course I play flute duets with them, but just getting them used to the idea of this is what we do. We collaborate. As a flutist, that is your whole career. You're not going to do concerts just you ever. So,
going back to the competition, there are some competitions that don't allow a teacher to accompany their own student.
I think that's smart.
I think
Yeah.
that's very smart, right? Especially with pianists.
Oh,
Sometimes they have the piano teacher playing the second piano part on a concerto.
And on the other hand, I could see why, as a piano teacher, it would be so tempting to do that, because then you like have all of those things combined into the same lesson experience, like teaching them the concerto and playing along if you've got two pianos, and then like introducing another person as a whole new dimension, which you should get to, but maybe it's like a hard final step. So I could definitely see the temptation, but I agree that like, well, if you were playing this with an orchestra, that's very different from playing with your own teacher. So.
I have a question about concert etiquette.
Uh-huh.
Do you teach your students about bowing at the end with their pianist?
I do try.
Okay.
Oh, it's harder now because at BYU I had the 2-hour flute class every Wednesday night, and so I would slate it to talk to them all about it. And now, again, like this was my intention to simplify my life, and I don't teach a big weekly flute class like that, and it frees up a lot of my time, which I was looking for. But I still have a lot of students giving recitals and concerts, and I have to remind myself, like, does this student understand about these things? I better check in with them. And once in a while, I've been at a concert and with one of my students, I'm like, I forgot to tell them this. And like, I should have thought to tell them this. And sometimes I've talked through very clearly, like you come out, you look at your pianist, you bow together, and they don't do it. Like they're shy or something.
Oh, you have to practice it. You actually have to walk from the
I'm
door.
talking about like grad students. Like, you asked me about bowing etiquette and we talked about it. And I didn't realize that you really haven't done it before.
Because
But
I
it's
will
a
do
good
it.
idea to rehearse it.
Yeah.
Oh,
You know it's coming up and say, okay, we're going to pretend, this is what we do. Because the more you do that, the more it becomes automatic.
Yeah.
Even though they're still like this when it's time to go out.
And especially because there are situations like juries or things like that where you don't
bow.
It's true.
And so they don't get used to like, well, when people are clapping, this is what you do. So
Maybe that should be part of the jury, though.
So
So that
They're
because surely the instructors recognize, okay, if you go on to perform, this is part of the performance. Even in a jury situation, you're still performing the teacher.
If they tell the jurors like, don't write anything, so you can
clap for me.
I don't need the applause. I just need to rehearse the bow.
So what do you think of my mouth's a little funny. I've got a mouthpiece up here.
okay.
So if you have a concert, what do you think of the instrumentalist or soloist who wants to have the accompanist stand only at the very end of the program with them? That's not.
I don't think I've come across that. Maybe just because I'm the teacher, so I haven't ever advocated it.
So typically, if the people are clapping, both
Oh,
are
yeah.
standing.
Definitely. Yeah.
I had a violist I performed with, and she only wanted me to stand at the very end of the program.
Yeah, I've never argued for that. And so I'm trying to like, what hypothetical situation could justify that? And the only thing I could think is like, if you're in a super rush to get on to the next piece, if you're like,
You have to be out of the hall because the next concert's they're waiting.
and that's like if we're just not taking time to bow at all. Like, done, thank you, here's the next thing.
It didn't sit very well with me because I went down to SUU and worked for a year, and they were very good about both standing the same time.
That does seem bizarre to me because
it's a little bizarre, and I don't know, I felt really funny about it.
Yeah, I think that's just bad policy.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I just wanted to.
Here's a little different flavor on that. Barbara Williams, do you remember Barbara, violin teacher, well respected here in the area? She taught that if you're playing a concerto with a student, that they take a solo bow as if they were playing it with an orchestra.
Yeah.
They motion to the pianist, then you bow together.
Yeah.
But if you're doing
That's fine.
chamber music, which is a sonata or even a showpiece,
Yeah.
then you bow together.
Yeah, well, and if it's like a recital where there are multiple different duos involved or something, but like it's my recital and I'm playing with piano and harp and this and that, it's fine if there are some certain situations, especially at the end, if the soloist comes out and bows alone and then brings everybody out or whatever. But definitely I wouldn't say that there should be some circumstance where the soloist bows and the pianist sits there as though they didn't do anything. I would never advocate that.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That makes it easier because the kid's thinking, was this a concerto that I just played? Well, how do I bow?
Yeah.
They,
Yeah, and I've never thought it's wrong if like the soloist bows and then gestures to the accompanist and the accompanist bows. But generally, well, and often when I play, my accompanist will kind of like gesture to me to bow and then we'll stand up. I think, and there's some flexibility with how all of that works. But especially if I've just played something with an accompanist that it's a duo, it's the piano part is equally hard. Even if they do this to me, I'll like,
insist. Yeah.
Like I want the audience to acknowledge, like, no, look at this piano part, So anyway.
Wow. That was really fun and interesting. Thank you so much for coming. And thank you everybody who has joined online. Sorry that you weren't here, but hopefully that you're either watching this later or you joined us. But you won't get the refreshments if you didn't come, which are waiting for us in the kitchen.